In this episode, I'm continuing to dive into the Nancy Guthrie mystery. It's been more than 3 months now since she went missing. Some new information, there's this task force that was put together, FBI and local detectives who continue to investigate the case. I know they just recently had a meeting. I'm going to get into what I learned about that. Kind of some, not drama, but the HOA where Nancy Guthrie lives is not happy that people continue to go by the house, which I'll talk about in this episode. And also in California, you guys may have heard about this, there was this elderly couple, it was a murder-suicide, and it seems it could all be connected back to an online scam. And I have questions about whether those scams, something like that, could that possibly be somehow connected to the Nancy Guthrie case? Could a scam somehow be involved? Could someone have been trying to scam her? I'm going to talk to retired FBI agent Maureen O'Connell, my friend, about all of this in this episode of. It's nice to see you again. I hope everything
You're
is
welcome.
going well with you. You look very nice.
You do too. It's good to see you. I see you got your hair cut, looking
I
good.
did. Yeah, I was telling you, it was getting a little poofy on the side, so
Yeah.
I had to kind of tame it down a little bit.
You
But
had to
there's a
clean it
couple.
up a little.
I did, yeah. There's a couple of new things I wanted to talk to you about, though, and get your take on. First of all, one of my sources close to the investigation, I was talking to, and I was told that, there's this task force made up of the FBI and some of the detectives from the Pima County Sheriff's Office that just worked the Nancy Guthrie case full time. And they had a meeting last week, which I guess there was a lot of buzz about what this meeting was going to be about. And it wasn't really that significant. It was just a check-in meeting. And I was told, which I wanted to see what your take was on this, that it was really to make sure everybody was okay. What do you think that like me? Is it just sort of like, could that just be, it's been 3 months, just want to, keep the energy high? Like, what do you think that means?
Well, when you're on a task force, you're always doing those kinds of meetings. And initially, they were probably every day, and then they went down to 3 times a week, and then they went down to 1 day a week, etc. But you have to get together and you have to get focused because some of the things that the FBI agents are doing are obviously tied into what the Pima County Sheriff guys are doing. I spent many years on task forces, so I understand how they work very, very well. It was my favorite assignment. I just loved being on a task force. But it's like, are you okay? Meaning, do you need anything else? Do you need any support? Do you need anything to further the investigation of whatever vein you're in right now or whatever road you're on? So, like if we were doing a wiretap, we would have some people would be in charge, like DEA would say, "Oh, we're going to be funding the wire and we'll do it at our wire room." And then we'll have FBI agents doing the surveillance for that. And then we'll have analysts, maybe even from another department, working on other aspects of that. And, it just goes on and on. So you can do things, you can work together and you can do things, but you have to check in all the time. You also have to say, hey guys, while the analysts were looking at A, B, C, and D, we discovered that this person here that we thought may have been on the back burner, a couple of weird things happened. What ideas do you guys have that we should be working on, or is there some aspect of this that you guys would like to handle from this point forward until we meet again, so to speak? So there's all kinds of interactivity, and you try to make it an inoperable, or you try to make it a situation where there's interoperability with regard to the communications. And you do want to check in with each other. Hey, are you guys cool? Do you have everything you need? I think that would be, in my opinion, that would be more the case. Unless, of course, the morale is so low that, these guys are having a hard time, which could definitely be the case, because this case is brutal, man. This case is like Atlas with the world on his shoulders,
Mhm.
and all these guys are doing everything they can. And I don't know that I've ever seen a case where where there appears to be less forward movement, but I would say that that's probably not the case. I would say that there probably is movement, but they're building a case against, one or more individuals.
What is it like to be under that kind of pressure? Like, I'm just thinking about these FBI agents, the detectives. Everybody's talking about this case. More time has gone by. I mean, that's a lot.
And it's everywhere. It's omnipresent. It's when you go home, everyone's asking. People know you're probably working on this case. The what the Pima County Sheriff deputies are going through right now is nothing short of insane. And they're doing the best job they can, but it's really, really difficult. And I said earlier that when it rains, it pours, and that's almost always the case. Like, going back to the only case I've ever done that was like that giant was I'm thinking of 9/11, where we didn't have a day off for something like 120 days, most of us. We worked straight through and we didn't complain. We tried not to, but our families were suffering. I mean, I was at coming out of church one time and someone walked up and I'm holding my little boy's hand and they're like, "Oh my God, I'm so glad you are okay because the first thing I thought of was both you and your husband getting blown up because LA was a thing right in front of my little boy." I mean, so it's everywhere, and it's bullshit. It pisses me off. People they think, "Oh, you're in law enforcement. You can take anything at any time from anyone in front of anyone else."
Mm.
We're humans too. So these people are, and it's a small group of people over there that are that are probably going to have it's just a stressful time. And when you're that stressed out, it affects your family, it affects other things, and it just seems to have cascading effects, and one thing compounds the other. So it's just very hard. And I wish them well, and I know they're doing the best job they can. And I honestly haven't. I hope I'm absolutely wrong, but I it seems like nothing went right. I was so excited when they first went to that house that night when you were on your way over to that guy's house
Yeah.
and then they found the car in the bar. I was like, "Oh, great, it's all coming together." And since then, it's been like crickets,
Mm.
you know? So I hope it's not like crickets. I hope they have things, they're developing things, they're working through things, they're waiting on all kinds of stuff. That's what I hope for.
Me too. It's been almost 3.5 months. Do you ever need like to take someone off and bring a new person in when you're on a task force like this, almost like new blood, new energy, a fresh set of eyes, or is it still too soon for that at the 3.5 month mark?
Well, I'm sure plenty of people have had eyes on this investigation, but there are also times where people get cycled off for reasons totally different. There could be a guy in there that's in the military that's going off for a deployment or to an additional school for 3 or 4 months. They're going to put somebody else in his place. There may be an FBI agent that's getting transferred to Washington, and he had his papers in long before Nancy went missing. He's going to get cycled off and someone else put in. So there's this general attrition that happens in law enforcement for all kinds of different reasons. Sometimes it's because, like in municipal law enforcement, you have the day shift, the night shift, the swing shift, however many shifts you guys have. And what you do these 4 month cycles or whatever the department has. And now it's time for this guy to go to the graveyard shift. So there's just this natural attrition. There are going to be new people coming in, going out, and not like to a great extent. I'm not talking like 40% of the people are leaving, et cetera, but you will have people leaving, you will have people coming back. And I think that's enough for new eyes coming in and out because everyone that comes in has to get brought up to speed and has to read all their documents and all the reports that have been provided to them.
The sheriff said that he is no longer communicating directly with the Guthrie family, with Savannah Guthrie. And in the beginning, he sort of alluded to the fact that he was, and he says now he isn't, and that they're just talking to the FBI. What what do you think that means?
Well, it sounds like the family got a little frustrated with getting information that didn't comport well with everything else they were hearing. And so if you're dealing with two entities, sometimes one's a better fit than the other one, and perhaps they think the other one, perhaps they think the FBI is a better fit. than dealing with the actual sheriff. There's got to be someone from the sheriff's department, and there's all kinds of qualified people that are really good at talking to people. Law enforcement officers are generally very good at talking to people, especially if you're like a detective or, well, not especially. They're just generally good at talking to people because you have to talk to all kinds of people from all kinds of places at many times a day, and you just get used to it.
How do you do that when you don't have answers yet and a family's getting frustrated? Like for you, when you were, doing the job, I don't know, do they ever get mad? Like how do you sort of navigate that?
Yeah, people lose their minds. People get really angry. People lash out. These are things that you're taught to expect and not take personally. And you just try to remain calm and try to maybe reel them in a little bit. Or sometimes it's just time and space is a better option. You just weigh these things out. If you're having a really difficult time, you can pass the baton on to someone else if you think it's going to be better. And that may be what happened here. Maybe the family or someone requested that someone else handle it, and perhaps one of the victim services persons from the FBI, they're very skilled and very kind and just really nice people to talk to. Perhaps one of them stepped in and did such a good job that they decided to keep it going down that particular road.
Or maybe the Guthries were frustrated with the sheriff. I mean, all of his interviews and just, there's been a lot of eyeballs on him, and obviously we know what's going on in Pima County where they're trying to throw him out. Maybe they just thought like this isn't who we want to be talking to.
Yeah, that's a possibility.
Yeah.
And their
Um,
lawyers Savannah's got a really, from what I hear, she's got a really great security team. And, those guys could have been saying, Savannah, just let's not even talk to this guy. Let's talk to someone else. And we can, you can make that happen. And this is how you do it.
yeah.
We don't know.
There were a couple of days where I don't know if you saw this, but like it made kind of like headlines or it was a lot of tweets about it when she was on the Today Show and then she would like kind of disappear for the end of the show or for the last half an hour of the show. And people are always like, oh my gosh, what does that mean? Is it something with the case? But you brought up her security team. I'm sure she's still living in some level of fear, right? I mean, not knowing who did this and if could possibly be, and she's got little kids. I mean, that's got to be rough.
It's got to be awful. And I mean, this was an unbelievably traumatic experience. And she's experiencing untold grief. And the way that happens, the way that works, the way that manifests itself is it's a wave that just overtakes you when you least expect it. So it's totally normal for her to be responding that way. And it's probably a situation where she either gets up and leaves or takes off for the last 20 minutes, or she sits there like a puddle on national television, which is not what she wants to do. She's probably trying to be strong for her children and her husband and family and siblings, and it's just too much.
I interviewed John Ramsey, obviously, his case from 1996 with John Bonet, and it was interesting because he, knows what it's like to be under the media spotlight, knows what it's like when a lot of people think you're involved and you didn't do anything wrong. But one thing he said, I said, well, what would your advice for the Guthrie family be? And the first thing he said was that they need to scrutinize the police. He compared it to like when you're in the hospital and you can't just lay there and not like sort of fight for yourself and be an advocate for yourself and push them along and make sure the nurse is doing the right thing. He said it's the same thing with law enforcement. I was wondering what you thought about that.
I don't agree with that in many instances and for a number of different reasons. In his particular case, I do agree with it because they hadn't had a homicide before. And so it's a different ball of wax altogether. If you're dealing with LAPD or LA County Sheriffs or Chicago PD or New York or Miami or any big city where they have a ton of homicides, no, I don't think you need to worry about that. And his issue, in my opinion, with regard to them focusing on him or someone in the family was the amount requested in that quote unquote ransom note was the exact amount of money that he got for his end of the year bonus, which is bizarre because it was something like, you know, an odd number, like $70,000 or something ridiculous. So that was beyond strange. and something that you just can't look away from. It's one of those things that once you see that, it's hard to unsee it.
But do you think if you're the Guthries, do you need to apply some kind of pressure, or do you just sit back and expect people to be doing their jobs?
It's normal, it's natural for families in situations like this to push for more, push for answers. That's just normal human behavior. So people do that, and we don't have a problem with them doing that at all. Um, it's fine. I mean, it's what one would expect in a situation like this, and it's totally understandable.
What is it like when you're on the other side of that? Like when you're working the case? I guess, like you said, you just sort of expect it, or
I was talking to some homicide guys yesterday, and we were all talking, and the topic was when it rains, it falls. It seems like in situations like that, you always have like two things going on in like your whole world is falling apart, and all of a sudden the wheels are falling off your bus. It's just like, so in a situation like that, it might be better just to say, hey, I'm just gonna take a break here. I'm gonna take a powder, and can someone else handle this for me? But oftentimes people really like to stay the course, and they like to be there for these people, because when you spend decades in law enforcement, essentially you're spending decades as a victim's advocate. And that's
What is not in question is what the totality of that scene communicated to any experienced investigator who walked up to that front door. A vulnerable elderly woman was gone. There was blood. There was evidence of staged access. There was a destroyed security device. There was a suspicious figure on camera. The response to that scene should have been immediate, comprehensive, and unrelenting. What happened instead has been described by people with direct knowledge of the investigation in terms that are difficult to reconcile with the evidence those investigators were looking at. The initial working theory, adopted by at least some investigators in the early hours and days of the case, was that Nancy Guthrie had walked away from her home voluntarily. A source close to the investigation confirmed this on record, with their identity protected. That source stated directly that detectives operated under the walkaway assumption during the period when investigative speed was most critical, and that this theory slowed the investigation significantly during those irreplaceable first hours. Savannah Guthrie spoke about this publicly, with the patience of someone who had already explained the same thing many times and was exhausted by having to explain it again. She described her mother's physical condition. She described the blood on the doorstep. She described the propped doors and the camera torn from the wall. And she described what the family had been telling anyone who would listen from the very beginning. This is not a walkaway. Something is very wrong. Please, do something. Applying a walkaway theory to the scene described above, to an 84-year-old woman with severe mobility limitations, whose security camera had been physically destroyed, whose doorstep carried visible bloodstains, whose doors had been deliberately staged for access, is not a minor investigative misjudgment. It is a foundational failure. And foundational failures, in the first hours of a missing person investigation, carry consequences that cannot be reversed. If a missing person is believed to have left voluntarily, the urgency of the response changes in every measurable way. You look for them nearby. You expect them to surface within a reasonable distance. You do not immediately begin asking whether they were loaded into a vehicle and driven 45 minutes to the Mexican border. You do not deploy every available resource in the first moments. You wait. You monitor. And while you wait, evidence degrades. Trails go cold. The window that can never be recovered closes permanently. There was also confusion, documented and on the record, about what Nancy's family actually believed had happened to her. Sergeant Aaron Cross, who serves as Union president of the Pima County Sheriff's Office, initially told journalist Brian Entin that detectives had relayed to him that Nancy's family believed she was a walkaway. This directly contradicted what Savannah Guthrie and those close to the family had consistently maintained. Over the following weekend, Cross contacted Entin with a correction. He had followed up with the detectives, who clarified their meaning. What they actually meant was that Nancy's family thought she might have had a medical emergency and called an ambulance independently. Not that she had walked away under her own power, but that she may have sought help and been transported by an emergency vehicle. That interpretation aligns more closely with what the family was saying. It reflects an understanding of Nancy's physical limitations. It does not align with blood on the doorstep, deliberately propped doors, and a security camera that had been torn from the wall. But the confusion itself, between what the family said, what was communicated to investigators, and what those investigators were actually operating under during the most critical hours, is a documented symptom of something seriously wrong with the coordination of the response. Sergeant Cross described that first week using language that left no room for diplomatic interpretation. He called it chaotic. He stated that detectives he spoke with described being unable to communicate effectively with each other during the period when coordination was most essential. He said the basic operational structure required for an investigation of this magnitude was simply absent, and he attributed this not to the investigators on the ground, who he said were not deliberately withholding information from each other, but to a failure of leadership from above. The chaos, in his assessment, was a top-down problem. Cross went further than almost any other member of his department has gone publicly on this case. He stated that in his view, Sheriff Chris Nanos should have turned the investigation over to the FBI. He cited the Bureau's offer of hundreds of agents. He cited the manpower limitations of his own department. He argued that a leader facing a case of this magnitude, with federal resources offered and available, had an obligation to use them, and that the failure to do so carried consequences that played out in real time during the most critical days of the investigation. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had offered to assist almost immediately after Nancy's disappearance was reported. FBI Director Kash Patel confirmed publicly that the Bureau had hundreds of agents ready to deploy. According to reporting, those agents were not integrated into the investigation. They were waiting while the investigation unfolded without them. It was not until approximately day 5 that the FBI was granted any meaningful access to Nancy Guthrie's home. That access lasted only a few hours. A brief, truncated walkthrough, not the comprehensive, systematic forensic processing that the scene demanded, but a short visit measured in hours, and then it was over. Retired FBI agent Maureen O'Connell described what a full evidence response team deployment should have looked like. Teams of 15 to 30 forensic specialists working every surface of the home, every room, every outbuilding, every door handle, every floor. Specialized tools used to remove door handles entirely for forensic examination. Sections of flooring cut where blood or trace evidence might have been deposited below the visible surface. The doormat near the front entrance, positioned in the area where blood was found, collected on day 1 as a matter of basic protocol. The doormat, as of day 100% reporting, was reportedly still at the scene. Still in place. A piece of physical evidence from the location where blood was found, left where it was found, while the investigation moved forward without it. The primary physical evidence reportedly recovered from the scene consisted of a single rootless hair and fingerprints. When O'Connell was told this, she said she did not believe it. She said she was not willing to accept that a major investigation into the violent disappearance of an elderly woman from a scene that clearly showed evidence of premeditated action had yielded so little. She said the answer to being told that was not to accept it and move on. The answer was to go back, to bring in more people, to begin the forensic processing again from the beginning. She also noted that even a rootless hair is not without potential investigative value. While a hair without an attached root cannot yield a full nuclear DNA profile, it may contain mitochondrial DNA, genetic material passed through the maternal line that can establish maternal lineage and potentially be used to eliminate or connect individuals to a scene. Whether that analysis was pursued and what results were obtained has not been publicly confirmed. Sheriff Chris Nanos is the elected sheriff of Pima County, Arizona. His decisions and his documented relationship with the FBI sit at the center of this story. Video from approximately 2016 shows Nanos making explicitly negative public statements about the Bureau. This is not allegation. It is on the record. When the FBI offered its resources, when hundreds of agents were positioned and prepared, When the director of the bureau himself publicly expressed frustration with how the case was being managed, that offer was not embraced. It was limited to a brief access window on day 5, that forensic experts described as fundamentally inadequate for the scale of the task. O'Connell addressed this directly. She said that whatever personal feelings any law enforcement leader might hold about another agency, when a vulnerable adult is missing and blood is on the doorstep and a security camera has been destroyed, those feelings must be left at the door. Every available resource must be used. Every bridge that needs to be built must be built, however uncomfortable that may be, because the person who is missing does not have the luxury of waiting for institutional disputes to be resolved. She described the standardized incident command structure that should have been in place from day one, a system that law enforcement agencies practice regularly, specifically so that when a crisis occurs, the response actually functions. That system, she said, was not deployed. And the reason it was not deployed was leadership. The accountability process surrounding Sheriff Nanos has moved through its own institutional channels. The Pima County Board of Supervisors has been examining whether he should remain in his position. The proceedings have included questions about his work history and allegations that he misrepresented disciplinary suspensions from a previous position with the El Paso Police Department. Whether those proceedings produce meaningful consequences remains an open question. When a reporter from Fox Digital caught Nanos outside his office and asked whether the case was getting closer to resolution, he said it was. He said the investigation was getting closer. Then he got into his vehicle and drove away. Sources close to the investigation, speaking to Brian Entin, offered a different picture. They said investigators were not significantly closer to solving the case. They said there was no identified suspect. They said there was no single lead that those working the investigation felt they were closing in on. The gap between the sheriff's public statement and what sources embedded in the investigation were describing is not a small discrepancy. FBI Director Kash Patel's public statements about this case were, by the standards of how directors of the Bureau typically speak about matters involving local law enforcement jurisdiction, extraordinary. O'Connell, who spent her career inside the Bureau and understands what a director's public comments mean in the context of interagency relations, said she had never seen a director make statements of that kind about a case of this nature. She offered two possible explanations. The first, the case was in far worse shape than the public had been led to believe, and Patel was publicly creating distance because the investigation, given evidence degraded during the chaotic first week, was unlikely to reach resolution. The second, Patel was applying deliberate pressure using his public platform strategically, making it politically and institutionally difficult for the Pima County Sheriff's Office to continue limiting the Bureau's involvement. She said she did not know which explanation was correct, but she said both pointed to the same underlying truth. Something went seriously wrong in the first days of this investigation, and the consequences were still being felt more than 100 days later. Nancy Guthrie's home in Tucson sits approximately 45 minutes by car from the Mexican border. The primary crossing point in the area processes thousands of vehicles and pedestrians daily. Brian Entin traveled to that border during the early weeks of the investigation. He walked into Mexico. He was asked no questions. He showed no identification. He crossed into another country without a single interaction with any official on the Mexican side. A person hidden inside a vehicle could potentially cross without detection. A vehicle carrying someone against their will would be extraordinarily difficult to identify among the volume of traffic moving through that crossing on any given day. Early in the case, officials publicly stated they did not believe Mexico was involved. Retired Lieutenant Dave Smith, a former Arizona Department of Public Safety official with direct knowledge of the region, raised a pointed observation in a Fox Digital interview. He noted that if investigators believed a suspect or victim had crossed into Mexico, that would in many circumstances create the basis for a federal investigation. He also noted the consistent pattern throughout the case of significant effort to keep federal authorities at a distance. And he observed that one of the most direct ways to prevent a federal takeover of a case would be to firmly and publicly deny, early in the investigation, any international dimension. He stated explicitly that this was his personal analysis. But the connection he drew between the early dismissal of the Mexico angle and the broader pattern of limiting federal involvement is one that has been difficult to set aside. O'Connell confirmed her understanding that the FBI had, despite being largely sidelined from the primary investigation, independently pursued the Mexico angle through the Bureau's legal attaché office, the established mechanism for working with law enforcement counterparts in foreign countries. Federal agents working the crossing were engaged at some level, but without a vehicle description, without a suspect identification, without knowing what to look for and when and in what direction, the task of reviewing border crossing footage is an enormous undertaking. The Mexico angle has not been ruled out. It has also not been confirmed. Day 100% of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance fell on Mother's Day. Savannah Guthrie posted a video. She wrote about her mother as a mother, a daughter, a sister, a daughter, grandmother. She wrote that the family missed her with every breath. She wrote that they would never stop looking. She said they would not be at peace until they found her. She asked anyone with information to call the FBI tip line. She asked people to keep praying. And she asked for the one thing that, after 100 days of waiting, was still the only thing that mattered. Bring her home. 3 words. The entirety of what a daughter asks when every other request has gone unanswered. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She had severe chronic back pain. She loved her family deeply. She raised a daughter who became one of the most recognized journalists in the country. She was taken from her home in a way that left blood on her doorstep, a destroyed camera where her front entrance had once been monitored, and questions that have remained unanswered for more than 100 days. Her case is not closed. The investigation continues. Tips are still being accepted. A financial reward remains available for information that leads to a resolution. If you have any information, any detail at all, however small, however seemingly insignificant, call the FBI tip line. Calls can be made anonymously. Let investigators determine what is relevant. A single piece of information can be the connection that changes everything. Her name is Nancy Guthrie. She has not been found. Her family is still waiting. If this case matters to you, if you believe that the failures documented here deserve continued scrutiny, and that Nancy Guthrie deserves continued attention, take one moment right now. Subscribe to True Crime Hour, and hit the like button on this video. Every subscription, and every like, brings this story in front of more people. More people means more awareness. More awareness means more pressure. And more pressure means more chances that someone who has information will finally come forward. True Crime Hour will not stop covering this case. Subscribe now, and neither will you. Her name is Nancy Guthrie. Do not let the world forget her.